So what are we up to today? Now it's a meditation, right? Correct? Okay. All right. So I need to say something. I was thinking yesterday I was talking about the Sila Bhatta Paramasa and how we attach to culture. But I'm glad I live in a cultured society, and Thailand taught me a lot about I found Thai culture very graceful, and coming to Wat Pong and being with the monks and seeing how they treated their teacher so beautifully, with such respect, with lots of body language, which was displaying respect, of deference, and the head being lower than the teacher. So I learned a lot just about like the space. Thais are very cognizant of space, where you are and where an elder is and how you're moving in front of a person, and is it appropriate or not. And that was a lovely teaching in mindfulness and grace. And then the story I like to tell is I was moving a spittoon with my foot and setting it up for the meal. And Luangpor Cha looked at me, he said, "My Sue, that's not beautiful. You know, I think you'd say yap in Thai." And that was a lovely way to put it. That's not beautiful. That's lazy. You know, it's not a football. But it was done, you know, said very gracefully. Sometimes he could be very brusque too. But in any case, I learned, and the monasteries in Thailand, Ajahn Chah's monastery, the emphasis on our life is about a lot of care for the place we live, for the shrine room. And as you know, the famous story from Ajahn Chah or his line was, if you want to check out a monastery and see if it's a good monastery, go look at the toilets. It's very, very true. The toilets aren't clean, you know, the monks probably are just lazy. So the standard at Wat Pong was of cleanliness, of care, of deference, of samakhi, living together, was the context within which the deeper aspiration of the deathless took place. And so the genius of Ajahn Chah was to use the Vinaya, the monks' Vinaya, the monks' rule, and what we call Kawat, the particular protocols of any monastery, to use all that and to create a culture, a monastic culture, within which mindfulness, respect, and so many other good qualities, contentment with little, so many qualities were developed. And then that gave the cultural context within which the deeper kind of reflections on the unconditioned, the uncreated could take place. Without that context, it'd be very, very difficult. And so that context, even if like the first few years in my mind was really, really rough. You know, the unconditioned was far from my consideration. It was more survival. Can I just survive another year? Or can I get through the hot season without going crazy? But the form and the structure carried me. It carried me in a way which was helpful. Other monks were there, carried me in the way of encouragement, carried me away. And always the Vinaya is about reflection rather than rule keeping. So if I was a rule-keeping monk and I just did monasticism and just kept the rules, then that would be Sila Bhatta Paramasa. I'd be attached to the rules. And the sign would be, when I left the monastery, what would happen? Like, could I adapt to a different situation? So when Ajahn Chah came to England, we were very curious to see how culturally adaptable is he? Because he grew up in an agrarian culture. His life was very provincial, and he had contact with Bangkok people, but he didn't leave the monastery all that much. So he had no real cultural information about other ways of functioning. So we were very curious. So how is he going to be in London? How is he going to handle that? And he was totally adaptable, totally charming. So he was, in that sense, cosmopolitan. You know, in English, the word provincial means you have a kind of narrow viewpoint because you haven't seen a wider world. And then cosmopolitan has a sense that you've seen other countries and other cultures. Well, Luangpor Cha's life was provincial, but his mind was totally open and vast and adaptable. So when he came into Heathrow Airport, and Ajahn Hernando and I hadn't seen him for 2 years, he was like an emperor. He just, everyone's rushing, right? With their bags, and they're looking for their loved ones. And Ajahn Chah just came in with his walking stick. He walked slowly and gracefully, like he owned Heathrow Airport. He just was the king. And Anando and I, we were like so in love with him. We just fell to the ground and bowed to him in the middle of, you know, the gangway of Heathrow. These people are kind of bouncing around us. Like, what are these guys doing? Then there was a woman, I think her name was Nora. She was an opera singer who came to the Hampstead Vihara in London. She was a very faithful disciple. And she offered Luangpor Cha and the Sangha a dana in her home. She had a small flat, and she was ultra nervous. She'd never done this. She knew Ajahn Chah was, but there was just like this aura about the man. And she just laid out the most incredible banquet. You wouldn't believe how much food was out there. Now in Thailand, a forest monk would never praise the food offered. The kind of duty of a forest monk is to say, "Po you die," or "Po chai die," which means it's good enough. It'll take me through the day. So the idea is that the monk isn't, you know, pushing his dietary agenda on the lay people and not getting too lost in food and saying, "Thank you, that was sufficient." Yeah. Ça suffit in French. So Luangpor Cha then, now that might not sound like a big thing, but in monasticism, it's a big thing. So then Luangpor Cha he could see how nervous Nora was. She was really, really nervous, poor thing, right? I get everything right. I hope I have everything right. So Luangpor just praised her. It was fantastic food, best meal I've ever had. So what? Luangpor Cha, you say that? And that was my sense of his cosmopolitan mind, or metta, or karuna, that it wasn't about Thai culture now. It wasn't about the context of the forest monk. It was the context of this person, Nora, who's not an Isan woman. She's a sophisticated London woman. She's afraid. She's nervous. And he was just utterly charming, just put her at her ease. And I mean, that doesn't sound like much, but in our life, that's it. Ooh, good for you. I like that. And then you've probably heard this story too. There's only so many Ajahn Chah stories, unless I invent new ones. But I wasn't in this one, but Luangpor Cha, Luangpor Sumedho, and Luangpor Viradhammo. Then it was Ajahn Sumedho. So Luangpor Cha, Luangpor Sumedho. Then it was Ajahn Sumedho and Ajahn Viradhammo. Luangpor Cha is 5'2". Luangpor Sumedho is 6'3", and Viradhammo is about 5'6". So so monks, brown robes, and on Pindapad in London, on a busy street. So I mean, it's quite a sight. You've got this short Asian man who's walking around like the king of the world with his arms full. Then you got Ajahn Sumedho towering over, and you got Ajahn Viradhammo from London behind him. So they're just available for Pindapad. Nothing was put in their bowls that time. But as we're approaching the Vihara, the Hampstead Vihara where we were staying, this was just before the purchase of Chithurst, a kind of aggressive skinhead type punk guy, very, very aggressive, very rude, started to come towards us and started to swear at us and started to make body language. He was going to kick Ajahn Chah. And I'm sure Ajahn Sumedho probably had his alms bowl ready to hit the guy in the head if he touched Ajahn Chah or something. But it was just a kind of vicious threat, but there was no action. So he was just some kind of a troubled man. And Ajahn Chah just watched him. And then we walked on. And then we got to the Hamster Vihar and opening the door, and he turned to Ajahn Sumedho. He says, "Oh, they'll teach you very well here." And it's true, like in Thailand, you'd never get that. And so when we would go on Pindapat, like one guy came up to Luangpor Viradhammo and said, "You have to understand European geography for this." He said, "Budapest." Now, Budapest is the capital of Hungary, is it? Hungary, and a pest is like something nasty. Or I once went on Pindapod and the policeman stopped me. And he said, "What are you doing?" I said, "I'm on alms round." And he said, "Well, what's that thing?" "That's my ball." And he said, "What's there?" I said, "I opened it up, nothing." I said, "You want to put something in it?" So, culturally, it was very, very interesting. I was very homesick for Thailand. And because when I got to Thailand, I was a bit homesick for Western culture and Western food and speaking English. Then I became very enamored of Thailand and loved living there. And then I got to London, then I was homesick for Thailand. You can't win. But the kind of teaching that Luangpor Chah gave us around the Vinaya, that was for reflection rather than attachment, because sometimes rules and precepts become a kind of attachment, and you think it's like you're if you break this rule, you're going to like fall into hell or something, and that's fear. So to keep the precepts out of fear is not liberating, but not to keep the precepts is also not liberating. So sometimes the cultural things that we are trained with then can create fears. If I don't do this, something bad will happen to you, but they're not moral. And so I think cultural fear is something you kind of like it was interesting, us being in London, trying to adapt to Western culture, and yet trying to stay as forest monks. There was, I think, from most monks who came from Thailand, there was always the fear that, are we doing it right? You know, would Luangpor Chah approve? Maybe there's some Thai people watching or whatever. This is a kind of attachment to a way of being. And of course, we work through that. So culture is important, but the capacity to see yourself in other cultural formats and in other situations is a kind of a test to see. Now, there was an Asian monk who was living in London. He was a great scholar, and he wrote a piece saying that, well, if monks come to the West, they should dress like vicars. You know, they should have brown corduroys in a brown jacket with leather on the elbows or something like that, and that they should only wear their robe in the temple. And we read that, we said, well, if that's the case, we're going back to Thailand. Because we didn't want to be vicars, we wanted to be bhikkhus. So we picked up, you know, we kept to our Vinaya, kept to our form, and then saw what are the adaptations we have to make. We weren't going to compromise our values, but we also wanted to see, well, what's important here? How can we be monks in a Western context? And what we saw, it wasn't really the form, it was how we taught, because how we were teaching now urban people in England who had English urban problems and neuroses and suffering, which we began to see are not dissimilar to all urban people. You know, all urban people have similar situation. So the adaptability was more from metta, you know, from metta karuna. What can we do which is helpful and effective for the society? And so we've been able to, because of Ajahn Chah's capacity to teach us Vinaya without it becoming Silabhata Paramasa, without it becoming superstition and fear, as a way of being mindful and careful in what we do. So now we have monasteries all over, which are most are very, you know, successful and serve a broad community of people. So coming here, say to Perth, what if you think about it, we're trying to create a culture in a larger culture and run parallel to the larger culture. Fortunately, we have good Sri Lankan friends and good Thai friends, and one Malaysian. We have some Bangladesh friends and Indian friends and so on. So we have this body of Asian folk who understand us, and without them, we couldn't be successful, because the West doesn't really have, especially North America. Europe has more, doesn't even have a monastic tradition. So it's a very, very strange thing. So thanks to the support of our Asian friends who are from Theravada and also outside Theravada, we're able to do this life as it's intended to do. And then slowly Westerners begin to be interested in this, because they see, well, this is a viable community. This is a group of people who are living, they're not freaks, you know, they seem to be able to talk normally, and they seem to be kind. And so and they pay their bills. That's very important. And so little by little, we become a part of the society. It takes a long, long time. It takes a long time. But because we've honored our culture, but we're not fearful in that, we're able to introduce a kind of cultural format, which then other people can come into, reflect on, and then we can, and so this is why for me, it's a Bodhisattva project, creating a monastery, creating a community, not just about teaching, but creating value systems and life norms, which people can see in action. So this is like, we've been here, what, 13 years? Anoma, how many?
11 years.
More than that.
14.
14. Oh, one of our founders is here. So we're arguing that we're all getting old. So 14 years we're reckoning. And that's just starting, I would say. It's just starting. So it takes a long time, but we're not, you know, we're in it for multi-generation. So whatever we achieve as a community, it will carry on, because its roots are very, very good. But now, you know, we're starting to get a feeling for more local people becoming interested in us, and in a very solid way, not just for retreats, because the model in North America is people have affinity to a meditation teacher through retreats, rather than affinity to the Sangha and a monastery, because the Sangha is a larger body. So they relate to the teacher more, which is okay. But to get this idea that Sangha exists, that there's a whole body of people who relate not just to an individual, but to a larger body, that takes a long time. And a lot of people are not interested in traditional religion, because they've been burned by traditional religion. So fair enough. And so the idea of being with monks is not pleasant for them. So there are a lot of lay people now teaching, and there are people who like both, you know, who are happy with lay Buddhists or monastic Buddhists. But this sense of community takes a long time to do. So that's culture. I don't know why I went there, but there we go. I thought I'd just read something that I usually read on a retreat. So if you've heard it before, you'll hear it again. But it's something that I read for myself many, many times. And it touches some of the ideas I've been suggesting. It's from a teacher called Jean Klein, who is in the Advaita Vedanta tradition. And he's been influential in my life. So please listen. Let's see if this is helpful. We must therefore begin with the analysis of desire. What do I want? Can my desire be gratified by the possession of objects? Objects, are they what I seek? And by objects, I would say emotions are objects. Mind states are objects, not just like a car or something tangible like that, mental things. So objects, are they what I seek? Do they contain what I seek? Let us observe what happens when a desire is satisfied. We see that the gratification of a desire is nothing but its death, and that therefore, when we are in search of bliss, we really are pursuing nothing but the death of desire. And that would be Nirodha in a Buddhist sense. This proves that our ultimate desire is non-desire. But non-desire appears to our normal consciousness as being blankness. And yet, it is in this blankness that we must try to probe with open eyes so as to discover its true nature. In fact, this nothingness is experienced by everybody in infinitesimal gaps, which occur between thoughts, each time one desire dies, giving place to the next. If from time to time we experience moments of stillness and deep attention, turn towards these gaps of nothingness, little by little, the emptiness will reveal itself as being full and finally as supreme plenitude. One should adopt this attitude as often and as clearly as possible, thereby allowing it to be more penetrating and effective. With this in view, one should be available, ceaselessly questioning oneself, calmly observing one's own behavior without passion. So what he's saying is pay attention to the end of thought. Pay attention to the gap between thoughts. Put a lot of attention into that, which isn't like you don't do that by getting something. You observe that, so it's more heightened observation. So again, I'll say that again. If from time to time we experience moments of stillness and deep attention turn towards these gaps of nothingness, little by little, the emptiness will reveal itself as being full, and finally as supreme plenitude. One should adopt this attitude as often and as clearly as possible, thereby allowing it to be more penetrating and effective. With this in view, one should be available, ceaselessly questioning oneself, calmly observing one's own behavior without passion. A new and non-objective outlook may then progressively prevail on us, and we may come to understand that we are not the ego. We may then, with a complete and new awareness, taste the unexpected flavor of these moments of non-desire, which will be revealed as being plenitude, silence, and peace. This flavor, which is only fleeting at first, will become more constant and vigorous until that time when it will appear as a reality which carries us, enfolds us, and is our very substance. The bliss which is then experienced is entirely different from what we usually call happiness. For at this level of consciousness, one cannot even say, I am happy, since a consciousness which establishes a distinction between subject and an attribute would be a dual consciousness. We are now speaking of the peace of God, which passeth all understanding. So it's a Christian way of saying it. Let me see that. This is a difficult reading, so bear with me. The bliss which is then experienced is entirely different from what we usually call happiness. For at this level of consciousness, one cannot even say, I am happy, since a consciousness which establishes a distinction between a subject and an attribute would be a dual consciousness. So when I ask you to listen to sound and make the listening, the attitude of attention the important thing, not the sound, then that's taking you to what this is talking about. If I'm listening to the sound and I hear a new bird, which I haven't noticed before, oh yeah, what's that? I wonder what that is. Then I'm concerned about the quality of the sound, the attribute. And I might be very happy because, oh wow, it's a scarlet tanager. I haven't seen one of those before. So that would be the happiness of an attribute. Now, because we're not really concerned about the attribute or the object, we're concerned about the quality of attention itself. That's what takes you to what he's talking about. Hence my suggestion, doesn't matter what the sound is, see the quality of awareness, be the awareness. Huh? We have mentioned watchfulness and availability. It must be understood that these must be perfect in their quality. I've always found that combination interesting, like kind of the idea of being available. If I'm trying to get somewhere, get something, or I'm just preoccupied with my own thoughts, I'm not available. And I cannot be available to peace if I'm caught in the attributes of experience. So watchful and available. And what is available? It's like, okay, world, what are you? You're available. And notice how little we are available and how much we are preoccupied with whatever. So that's a kind of interesting way to look at mindfulness, watchful and available. Yeah? It must be understood that these must be perfect in their quality. The quality and the purity of attention which result are the essential conditions of success. And so that's what I'm trying to do in this retreat, and all retreats hopefully, is really emphasize the quality of awareness and then sustain that quality of awareness for spans of time. And that for me would be sama samadhi. And the virya, which is that inquiry, the effort. Huh? So you establish clarity, non-grasping, and then the challenge is to sustain that and stay available. The exercise of this pure attention implies the complete elimination of all elements from the past, thus allowing the authentic purity of the present to be completely grasped. Now, how difficult is that, right? I mean, just to stay in the present moment. That's huge. That's, it's really a challenge. We must forget everything and wait, yet wait for nothing. This entails a state of complete receptivity, which seizes and is open to the complete, eternal, and perfect newness of each moment. Difficult. It is also important that the body should be in a state of perfect relaxation, as the slightest attraction or repulsion results in tensions which impede the purity of attention. That's why I do yoga nidra. Developing the lying posture, there's very little sense of having to hold anything. And it's subtle, but then the capacity to investigate in this way becomes, to me, more profound. All right. So in your meditation, then, if you could consider that, first of all, the quality of attention is not something you get later, it's something you remember now. Part of that is the letting go of the past future scenarios. And that's one of the determinations you can make in creating this quality of attention is present moment awareness. So as the mind creates the future or recollects the past, that's a very, very powerful reflection, recollection, reminder, present moment awareness, present moment awareness. So then you become much more cognizant of the mind analyzing, planning, worrying, present moment. Then you can feel whatever the present moment is as a physical sense, if it's fear or whatever, but you're not creating a self in the future, and the same for the past. So I think that's the basic intention of meditation, present moment awareness, present moment. And you can just gently remind yourself of that. If you do, then notice this endless past, future stuff that we do. So having made that intention, and then just appreciating the gap between thoughts. And the difficulty there is that we try to get rid of thoughts. And that's a very important insight, that you're meditating and you think you have control of thoughts. You don't. They come up because they're natural to come up. And then you try to get rid of thoughts, but you don't notice that when you've noticed thought, then thought has ceased. That's what's happened. And rather than noticing the gap between the next thought, you jump into a thought like, I have to try harder, or I have to make more effort, or something like that. So you can program the mind that way. You can say to yourself, I'm going to notice the end of a thought when thought stops. So you might program yourself when you get a pain in the knee, or you hear a bird, then those are the interruption thinking pattern. And right there's a gap, there's silence, there's presence. And what I would suggest you need to do is like say, great, I'm here, rather than, oh God, I'm thinking too much, I'm a basket case, my meditation doesn't work, because it's aversion and it's thought in itself. So make that moment of the end of thought, the gap between thoughts, a moment of victory or confidence, or this is it, so that you appreciate it for 2 moments and 3 moments, and so that you become more cognizant of it when it's there, because it's there all the time. The gaps between thoughts are there all the time. And then you start to get a sense that openness is a possibility all the time. And then thinking becomes a much less deluding sankhara, because now you understand that thought, it just comes and goes. It's not you getting rid of it, and you see, oh, there's the gap. And quite often when you see the moment of silence after a thought, the whole thinking mind can fall away. So that's a place to explore. And the exploration will be, when you notice you're thinking, do you then try to get rid of thought? Is that what you do? If you do, then that won't work. But if you recognize thought, so what Luangpor Viradhammo, he says, put a thought in deliberately. Tomorrow is tomorrow. I don't know what tomorrow is. Or today is today, or yesterday was yesterday. And whatever thought, put it in and then just stop. I notice no thought. Notice no thought. Listen to sound and say, that's the sound of a bird. And then stop. And recognize no thought. So you deliberately notice the mind which is not preoccupied with thought. And notice how that then you're available. You're available. What are you available to? The silence of the mind, the stillness of the mind. Okay, I think that's probably too much, but let's do some meditation. See how that goes. Again, I'll set the clock for 45 minutes. And what kind of instruction will I give? Watchful and available. Interesting. So when you know the way things are, then you're available. watchful. So that might be sufficient for the whole meditation. But then you might feel you need to have something more concrete. So I think metta bhavana, doing that, creates a very helpful attitude in this watchful and available, because it brings you to a sense of contentment. Metta brings you to a sense of contentment. Then it's much easier to abide as witness, as watchful and available. So perhaps we could do a bit of that, as I was instructing earlier. So bring attention to the center of the chest. Feel the rising and falling of the chest. And notice it's still watchful and available. You know what's going on. Welcome the in-breath. And relax to the out-breath. Then on the in-breath, introduce the vision or name or feeling of someone who you're close to, who brings up an easy feeling of affection. So this isn't thinking about the person, it's connecting to the heart sense that that person evokes. So I say Luangpor, Luangpor Sumedho, Luangpor on the in-breath, and it evokes the feeling of kindness in my heart. And then may you be well. So I'm not thinking about Luangpor Sumedho in a narrative kind of way. It's just connecting to the heart. And the in-breath, Luangpor, abiding as that, and the out-breath, may you be well. The mind will want to go into discursive thinking, so extending the name of the person or the vision of the person, Luangpor for the whole in-breath. So you preoccupy the thinking mind with one word, or the image of them if you have lots of visual capacity. So the breath calms, and the name, the association, evoking of the feeling opens the heart. Very simple. And then do that with a few other people. Refresh that feeling. And then the suggestion might be to let go of the thoughts and just abide as this kind witness to the way things are, watchful, available, with this open, receptive attitude. If that's too vague, then go to the breath again. pick up the breath. But see if you can come to like a sustained attitude of attention and allow the flow of life just to come and go, the sounds, bodily feelings. And you're like the kind witness, welcoming all things, letting go of all things, that kind of attitude. But do this for a while first. Stimulate the heart this way for a few rounds for each person. Okay, I'll leave that for you and experiment with that. I don't really have much to add this evening. So perhaps we could close with the Karanya Metta Sutta.